President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, communities across the country have paid the price of Democrats' soft-on-crime policies. The Democratic Party has backed woke prosecutors who refused to enforce broad swaths of the criminal code. It has endorsed defund the police policies and candidates, and it's consistently shown more sympathy for the criminals who commit crimes than for the victims who were hurt by them. It's no surprise that these decisions carry very dangerous consequences, which are being felt across America. Businesses are fleeing Portland, Oregon, due to surging crime. The mayor of Chicago was just defeated in her primary because she failed to address rampant crime in that city. And one city that is not immune to these consequences is our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. So far this year, the District of Columbia has seen more than 36 homicides, a nearly 40% increase compared to last year. 40%. Sex crimes have more than doubled compared to last year, and there have been more than 1,200 motor vehicle thefts, including carjackings, which is more than double the number at this point last year. In total, the nation's capital, where we are located, reported a 25% increase in crime compared to last year. With crime on the rise, you would expect that the elected leaders at the D.C. City Council to take steps to improve public safety. But that's not what they did. In fact, council members took the exact opposite approach. Forget deterring criminal conduct. The D.C. City Council responded to this crime wave by reducing penalties for violent crime. It actually passed legislation that decreases punishment for many of the same crimes that have been on the rise over the last year. Lower penalties for carjackings, home invasions, and robberies. Lower penalties for convicted felons who illegally carry firearms and for felons who use guns to commit other crimes. There's no mandatory minimum sentences for any crime other than first-degree murder. It's a slap in the face of every law-abiding resident and visitor to this city. Every person who worries about getting carjacked or on their way home from work, like the people that work for us here in the nation's capital, or being robbed on the metro, like the visitors from our states who come into the nation's capital, who don't expect to be assaulted and robbed, or individuals who have their residence targeted by a serial burglar. This is not the kind of legislation that's meant to keep people safe. It's just the latest iteration of failed soft-on-crime policies. It's no surprise that D.C.'s criminal code rewrite was met with severe backlash. Even the Washington Post published an editorial entitled, "D.C.'s crime bill could make the city more dangerous." Well, I give them credit for stating the obvious. The U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia warned that this measure prevents courts from imposing penalties that appropriately reflect the seriousness of the offense and the defendant's criminal history. One local elected official used especially harsh words to describe a portion of the bill that would allow someone convicted of sexual assault to petition for early release after 20 years. She said, "I don't think the D.C. Council should be helping rapists get out of prison early. That's crazy. Crazy indeed." So crazy, in fact, that the city's liberal mayor, Muriel Bowser, even vetoed this measure when it reached her desk, saying, "It does not make us safer." I don't find myself agreeing with the Washington Post editorial board or the mayor of the District of Columbia often, but they're both right here. D.C. council members should have viewed her veto and the public outrage as a sign that they should go back to the drawing board. But unfortunately, they doubled down. D.C. City Council overrode the mayor's veto. They ignored the deep concerns of citizens of this city and the dire warnings from public safety advocates and plowed ahead. Fortunately, that's not the end of the road for this dangerous and deeply misguided bill. The Constitution of the United States gives Congress exclusive legislative jurisdiction over the District of Columbia. It's the federal district. And we must take action to prevent this criminal-friendly measure from going into effect. And as we've seen, this effort has broad bipartisan support, starting at the White House. But last month, the House of Representatives passed a resolution of disapproval by a vote of 250 to 173, with more than 30 Democrats crossing the aisle to support it. Thanks to the senator from Tennessee, Senator Hagerty's leadership, that resolution will receive a vote on the Senate floor this week. And I expect it will pass with strong bipartisan support, as it should, and put a final nail in the coffin of this dangerous and deeply misguided legislation. Soft on crime policies have had a devastating impact on cities across America, and we can't let our nation's very capital to become a consequence-free playground for lawbreakers. So I appreciate Senator Hagerty's leadership on this resolution and his work to ensure that it receives a vote in the Democrat-led Senate. Mr. President, on another but somewhat related matter, over the last several years, Washington Democrats have waged war on our independent federal judiciary. 3 years ago, the majority leader of the Senate, the senator from New York, joined an abortion rally outside the Supreme Court where he made deeply disturbing comments about two sitting associate justices on the Supreme Court of the United States. He said, quote, "I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions." That's a quote. Well, the majority leader certainly did not mince words. The top Democrat in the United States Senate threatened two sitting Supreme Court justices by name based on a case they were considering. In the years since, the radical left has picked up the sword and carried on the fight. Last summer, as the Supreme Court considered a case on abortion rights, a radical organization released the home addresses of several Supreme Court justices. And they encouraged protesters to show up at the justices' private homes to harass and intimidate. It was a disgusting invasion of privacy and a massive security risk, which sadly was met with nothing more than a shrug by many of our Democratic colleagues. Attorney General Garland himself had an opportunity to address this abhorrent conduct in the Judiciary Committee last week, and he confirmed that to date, no prosecutions have been brought under a federal statute making what these protesters did a crime, seeking to intimidate sitting justices and cause them to change their opinion on legal matters that they were charged with. No prosecutions. With no real repercussions for such gross behavior, the far left has now expanded its attack to include other federal judges. Last month, the liberal news site Vox published a story railing against what it described as Trump's worst judges, all of whom serve on the federal courts in my state of Texas. The author of that piece tweeted the article that featured a photo of one of those judges, Matthew Kacsmaryk. The author added that Judge Kacsmaryk is, quote, the single worst villain in the United States of America that most people have never heard of. And I'm determined to make him a household name. This blatant attack on this sitting federal judge and on the independent judiciary wasn't just limited to a liberal news site. Larger mainstream news sources joined in too. The Washington Post recently published an opinion piece that argued that the only way to rein in Republican judges is to shame them. These are federal judges who are given life tenure following Senate confirmation for the very purpose of making them insulated from politics so that they can remain laser focused on judging the law and interpreting the Constitution and applying it to the case before them. The Washington Post editorial or opinion piece I'm referring to says Democratic politicians, left-leaning activist groups, newspaper editorial boards, and other influential people and institutions need to start relentlessly blasting Republican-appointed judges. A former aide to Senator Schumer, the Majority Leader of the United States Senate, who now serves as the executive director of a dark money group called Demand Justice, shared that article on Twitter and endorsed the idea of referring to judges by their party affiliation. Again, these are Senate-confirmed judges who serve for life, who've basically forsworn politics. But this former aide to the Senate Majority Leader says, no, you need to refer to them by their party affiliation, presumably the party affiliation of the president who nominated them into the office. As our country struggles to deal with hate speak online and threats of violence against our leaders and politicians, it's hard to imagine anything getting more dangerous than the rhetoric targeting federal judges and the independent federal judiciary. Last summer, U.S. Marshals arrested a man outside of Justice Kavanaugh's home who had traveled all the way from California with the intention of assassinating Justice Kavanaugh. When the man was arrested, he had in his possession a Glock 17 pistol, along with ammunition, a knife, a hammer, a crowbar, and zip ties. He told authorities that it was his plan to break into the house and kill Justice Kavanaugh and then take his own life. Thank God he was caught before anyone was harmed. But we may not be so lucky next time when this reprehensible, irresponsible rhetoric strikes unstable individuals and prompts them to do things that none of us, I hope, would want or endorse. Blatant attacks against judges and our independent judiciary must come to an end. Sadly, one of our Senate colleagues has joined the ranks of the angry mob. Last month, the senior senator from Oregon delivered an incredibly dangerous speech here on the Senate floor, advocating for the Biden administration to ignore a potential court order from Judge Kacsmaryk's court. To be clear, this is a United States senator who said that the executive branch should disregard the lawful order of a federal district judge. He wants the Constitution to be effectively ripped into shreds and thrown out the window if the judge happens to decide a case in a way that he doesn't approve of. The left's attack on our independent judiciary just keeps getting more and more dangerous. It doesn't matter what case is in a federal court or what ruling is ultimately handed down. Senators must respect the Constitution itself, and with that comes three co-equal branches of government. Judicial independence is the thing that distinguishes our democracy and our Constitution from all other countries on the planet. Judicial independence. Judges who aren't afraid to call balls and strikes and interpret the Constitution, hopefully as written, and apply the laws that Congress passes. That judicial independence should never be threatened. And if a United States senator doesn't realize that, then we have some really, really big problems. Mr. President, I yield the floor.